No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode 93. Hope you had an amazing weekend. Please do click to subscribe to our new independent news source. Turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll support us, but also be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Today, I am so excited about this one. Alex Phillips, the former Brexit MEP turned independent media superstar with her brand new Substack, That's What She Said, is Outspoken. And boy, we have a lot to talk about because breaking right now, an establishment plot to stop Jeremy Clarkson and Nigel Farage, the two men who I believe have the best chance of becoming Britain's Trump. And with common sense like this, slippery Starmer certainly has reason to be worried.
Someone is dying of a heart attack somewhere up in Acton. Ambulance can't get there because they're building a cycle lane. We live in absurd times.
In my digest next, I'll tell you how Clarkson is accusing the government, of ethnically cleansing the countryside of farmers as he ups his political attacks by a gear, maybe a top gear, as Labour desperately tries to neutralise Farage's connection with Trump. Also coming up on the show today, the leftie meltdown over the US election continues in the MSM.
Will plunge the United States into, at very least, a recession and at worst, a depression. So yes, I did cry this week.
And as a teenage so-called rioter is freed from prison with his entire 14-month sentence overturned, should Tommy Robinson really remain behind bars? Well, Alex interviewed him just before he was locked up.
I'm upset thinking about it, man. Oh, mate. Her whole life has changed.
So Alex will reveal all about that extraordinary exchange and interview later in the show. Then in the Uncancelled After Show today, fury as Narinder Kaur attacks the ageing appearance of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, at Remembrance Sunday yesterday. I'll tell you how Julie Burchill and Anne Haggerty lashed out. And I'll also get Alex Phillips' verdict on the new Boots Christmas ad. Have you seen this one? Is it an example of anti-white racism? We will discuss. And some big news for you. This is the second week that the Uncancelled After Show is now broadcast exclusively, daily, and on demand via Substack. So you can get to my Substack either by Googling Dan Wootton Outspoken Substack or visiting www.outspoken.live. If you subscribe to a monthly paid membership, you get access to the after show every single weekday, plus my exclusive reporting and columns too. Most importantly, Substack is a safe space. It's free of censorship. Your support at just £5 a month gives you 30 minutes of that extra content every single weekday, but also allows me to continue making this daily independent news show. But now, let's go. I really believe now that the opposition to two-tier Keir Starmer's crooked and corrupt anti-English government isn't going to come from the usual suspects. The UK is awaiting a revolutionary, our Trump figure to save us from the globalists, the woke mob, and the establishment blob. And so far, at least, there are only two contenders, in my view, to take that role. So it's no surprise the elite class is doing everything they possibly can to shut them both down. Jeremy Clarkson emerged as an early critic of the government. But look, he was prepared to give them a chance. Listen to this interview.
And these are trees that the Mayor of London wanted to pull down.
Just fine. What's your message to the new government? Do you think they get the kind of rural economy at all?
No, I don't think any of them have set foot outside Kentish Town for the last 35 years. No, they're a hopeless bunch.
So would you invite Keir to your pub, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister?
No, he's banned. He's the first person to be banned. He's actually on a board in the hall. He's banned.
Why? What have you got against him?
Hello? I thought you were running a news operation.
Okay.
He hasn't done much to endear himself to me yet. Well, we'll have a look at farming. It all might turn around. You never know.
But it didn't turn around. We know that. The budget changed everything. Clarkson wrote, "Farmers, I know that you have been shafted today, but please don't despair. Just look after yourselves for 5 short years and this shower will be gone." But in the past fortnight, an intriguing new proposition has emerged. Clarkson as a political figure, because he's going to be leading next week's protests at Westminster against Labour. And in the Sun column that he writes over the weekend, a line from him saw the entire political establishment take note. It's brilliant. I'm going to read it to you in full. Clarkson wrote in the Sun, "I'm becoming more convinced that Starmer and Reeves have a sinister plan. They want to carpet bomb our farmland with new towns for immigrants and net zero wind farms. But before they can do that, they have to ethnically cleanse the countryside of farmers." Now, you can imagine the reaction to that. Connor Tomlinson, good friend of ours, posted on X, "Caesar has appeared." And then James Canagasorium added this more detailed analysis, writing, "Genuinely think that if Jeremy Clarkson entered politics now, it could be a moment. Britain's Trump moment, but far more English and less authoritarian. He has reach, a massive TV show, part of the nation's mental furniture. He has become the countryside's most effective representative in decades. He's far more heterodox than his opponents suggest. Winds up all the right people, everyone hollering at me with political mechanics." And you only have to watch Clarkson's takedown of failed London Mayor Sadiq Khan's awful cycle lanes in London to just imagine Clarkson very quickly becoming the country's most popular politician.
And these are trees that the Mayor of London wanted to pull down to make way for a cycle lane. Well, he can fuck off. I mean, the man's obviously deranged. You can't pull trees down so that people can cycle. I mean, I know that cycle lanes now are seen as the single most important thing in the world by all those lunatics with 5 hardened bananas on their head and a little GoPro, but they can fuck off. They're not. I was just coming just now into London on the A40, where they've taken one of the lanes away to make a cycle lane. Massive traffic jam resulting from it, and stuck in it is an ambulance. Someone is dying of a heart attack somewhere up in Acton. Ambulance can't get there because they're building a cycle lane. We live in absurd times.
Yes, we do. But for the moment, the man the establishment fears most remains Nigel Farage, an actual politician with actual declared ambitions to become Prime Minister. And why else would he have been blocked? Outrageously blocked, by the way, from laying a wreath at the Cenotaph yesterday. As Reform's Deputy Leader Richard Tice posted on X, Remembrance Day at Cenotaph, why were Reform UK not allowed to lay a wreath? We got more votes than SNP, Lib Dems and DUP combined, yet they all laid wreaths. Shameful stitch up. Farage blamed the establishment, and I think he's right. He told GB News that Reform UK was told that it could not lay a wreath as the party only has 5 MPs below the threshold of 6. How convenient. Needed to qualify for laying a wreath. Meanwhile, the government completely rejected Nigel's offer, his offer for the good of Britain, by the way, to act as an unofficial envoy between the UK and the new Trump administration, an idea that has been endorsed by former Tory Home Secretary Suella Braverman.
That they ought to be making use of Nigel Farage in terms of talking to the new US government?
Listen, I think in the national interest, Absolutely. Listen, Nigel Farage has got a good relationship with Donald Trump. He's been part of the campaign. He's been a supporter. Donald Trump obviously rates him. Again, if Keir Starmer were a bigger man, I think he would put aside petty differences and actually try and harness the value that Nigel Farage adds to the national interest. Who wouldn't?
Do you think he'd be a good ambassador to the US for us?
Listen, these questions aren't really for me, but again, I mean, it's very much for the Prime Minister to decide who makes up his diplomatic corps.
But do you think he'd do a good job?
I think he would. I think Nigel Farage is a good ambassador for the UK. I think there's obviously a meeting of minds with the Republican administration. And at the end of the day, the national interest is what must come first. We want a UK-US trade deal.
Makes perfect sense, right? And you remember Keir Starmer at the start of his premiership said he was always going to put country before party. But now I want to show you Keir Starmer's stooge, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, literally scoff and laugh at the idea of engaging Nigel Farage. Watch this and get angry.
Look, it's not for me to advise Mr. Farage about his career options.
No, I'm not asking you to advise him. I'm asking you whether you take advantage of his offer.
I think that's
it's free.
I think that's probably unlikely. My advice to Mr. Farage would be he might want to concentrate his efforts on the constituents in Clacton that elected him into office, as opposed to spending his time in the United States of America.
Well, okay, I'm laughing about it, but there is a serious point here. Your leader has said time and time again, I remember it from his conference speech, we will always put country before party. Mm-hmm. Man comes along, it might be a different party, and he says, I can help you. And it's manifest he can help you. He is close to Trump. Trump listens to him because Trump tells the world that he listens to Nigel Farage. Why would you snub the offer of help? That's a help for the country, unless you're putting now your party's interests and dislike of Mr. Farage before the country's interests.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Farage will be pleased you're making the case for him. I mean, look, the counterfactual here is that we do not have influence and we do not have relationships. That's just not true. Karen Pierce, our ambassador in the United States, the team, the foreign secretary, people that work in government here in Westminster have got relationships with President-elect Trump, Vice President-elect
Yeah, but none of them gets invited to Mar-a-Lago. None of them gets photographed in Trump Tower. Why don't you use this man who's offering you help?
As I say, I think he should focus on working with his constituents in Clacton, who deserve a bit of a full-time MP as opposed to transatlantic commentator.
And have you noticed that's the line? That's the establishment line. That's what they've agreed to say about Farage. Oh, little Farage, you just stay in Clacton. And sure enough, that was the line of questioning that Sly News put to Nigel this week. And although his response shut them up.
About your life as an MP, because there have been some who've accused you of not spending enough time in Clacton. Do you think that's a fair accusation?
No.
How many times have you been to Clacton?
I've just exchanged contracts on a house that I'll be living there. Is that good enough? How much time is Keir Starmer spending in his constituency? How much time is Ed Davey spending?
You're not Prime Minister, to be fair.
How much time is Ed Davey spending in his constituency? I am representing Clarkson, yes, but I'm also leading a national political party.
You missed votes on the budget. You've been in the US. I mean, it feels like you don't really like these questions.
No, I'm just telling you. I've bought a house in Clacton. What more do you want me to do? What more? I mean, what more can I do?
What about surgeries? What's happening with those? Are you going to be doing
Done loads of them, lots of them. Online consultations, telephone calls, lots of them.
Do you think being an MP is a good job? Do you think
It was an honour.
Is it a challenge, balancing everything?
I had the same problem as an MEP. You know, I was an MEP for over 20 years, but for over half of that, I led a national political party. Doing both is hard. There's no question about that. Of course it is.
But look, politicians can try to ignore Farage and Clarkson all they like for now, but I don't believe that position will hold. And actually, two posts sum that up for me this week, and I wanted to share them both with you, both from good men. First, Reform UK's Howard Cox, who shared the feelings of millions on Remembrance Sunday when he wrote, "Today, I attended a local Remembrance Day event, then watched back the National Cenotaph event. I felt physically sick seeing Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Yvette Cooper and Sadiq Khan at the ceremony, 4 people who hate the UK and claiming to care for those who died for our freedom." And then perhaps more importantly from Nick Dixon, who said, "Starmer can never recover from how he handled Southport. Nothing else he does will ever matter." And I think he's completely right. Slippery Starmer destroyed what limited trust he had with us, his people, within weeks of entering number 10. He will be punished for it. But so will the Westminster system that lied to get him into Downing Street, and that is why they are plotting so hard to try and stop Jeremy Clarkson and Nigel Farage. Now, the Uncancelled Interview. And I am so excited today to be joined by my friend, but also one of the country's most interesting former politicians turned broadcasters. She is now an independent Substack star, having launched That's What She Said. Alex Phillips, so great to have you here, and I know there's a lot we're going to discuss over the next 90 minutes or so. But can I ask you first, Alex, because I know you are incredibly close to Nigel. You were one of his Brexit Party MEPs, but in fact, your relationship professionally dated back to the UKIP days. So do you believe that there is a chance he could be Britain's Trump, that he could be Prime Minister by 2029?
Of course there is. Look, you have to look at the direction of travel. You've had populism sweep its way across the continent of Europe. It's only in countries where they've been able to game the system and create these sort of unified opposition coalitions they've prevented populist parties from taking the reins. You've now got Trump in the White House in America. I mean, wake up and smell the coffee. You can see which way voters in the West are going. They don't want globalism. They don't like the woke stuff. They don't like the snooty, sneering leftists. I mean, looking at that interview earlier with the Labour Party man sort of laughing and chuckling, "Oh, he should just stay in Clacton, shouldn't he?" It's like, are they so disconnected that they would rather chop off their nose or the nose of the country to spite their face? You know, Nigel Farage has a very good relationship with Donald Trump. He's going to be having conversations with Trump anyway. What he was saying is, we're going to be having sidebars. We phone each other. We communicate. He listens to me. Let me bring this inside the tent. Let me do that with you involved, so there's no clashes going on here. So we're all working in lockstep, and yet they can't help themselves. And the ridiculous questions about how many days a week are you and your constituents? I've heard them ask that of anybody else. It's pathetic. So, you know, do I think he's going to end up in number 10? I think there's a very real prospect, because when we come round to the next election, guess what? The Labour Party will have been the incumbents. They're already hated. You look at their polling figures, the approval ratings, it has absolutely collapsed. They're despised. Is the Conservative Party going to be able to become more reformed than reform? Because that is what the public's crying out for, that kind of right-wingery, if you will. No, I mean, I don't think they will. They're still a divided party. You've still got people in the Conservative Party saying, "Oh, well, if Kemi Badenoch tries to do this, if she tries to do that, she's going to have us to face." And I think Reform are going to be able to target all of those second places they got in the last election, about 98 second places where they were just behind Labour, and actually game the first past the post system to get a massive foothold. I think there's going to be a revolution at the next general election.
Yes, revolution is the word. But what was interesting, Alex, I was reading, I think your latest Substack over the weekend, and you made the point that actually, despite what the media commentary might be, this isn't some sort of lurch to the right. It is in fact simply a return to the centre ground. But the centre ground has been redefined for people like you and people like me to be described as far right, which is ludicrous.
I know, it's just pathetic, isn't it? And they don't understand that this is being rejected, or they don't get why it's being rejected, because they don't know what people are. They don't leave their metropolitan bubbles. They live in an echo chamber of, it goes like this. I think it was Lionel Shriver who coined the term, or used the term, luxury ideologies. Back in the day, if you wanted to keep up with the Joneses, you got the latest Balenciaga handbag, you got a particular car, you got a type of phone that no one else could have. You went and got a suntan, a la Coco Chanel, to prove that you could afford to fly abroad. Well, even though the wealth gap has grown, people having access to a more luxury lifestyle, or being able to present that externally, has been hugely uplifted. And so now the only way that they've got to keep up with the Joneses, to show their elitism, to sort of shower themselves in the purifying light of superiority, is with this faux moral rectitude. And it's the perfect thing to use, because they don't live at the sharp end of mass inward migration. They don't live at the sharp end of some of these woke ideologies that essentially are tearing families apart, eradicating our history, our heritage, our culture. They're incubated from this. I always say the problem is with the metropolitan elites is because they live such a sheltered existence, they have a totally hindered view. When you've got no roof over your head, guess what? You're exposed to the elements. And that's what's going on here.
Indeed, indeed. Now, can I ask you, Alex, about Jeremy Clarkson? Because at this point, let's just be clear, he is not a declared politician, but he is certainly now, I would argue, one of the most effective critics of this Labour government. He's going to be leading the farmers' protest next week to Westminster. And his rhetoric, which I completely agree with, by the way, has ramped up a gear, with him saying very, very clearly that he believes that this Labour government is trying to ethnically cleanse the countryside. Could it be Jeremy Clarkson who is Britain's Trump?
Well, I don't think he's going to get engaged in politics. And what's ironic is most people think he probably voted Brexit, and he didn't. And what I was saying before about people with a sheltered existence have a hindered view, ever since he actually got out of London and got out of the cosy Cotswold village where he weekended, and actually started roughing and tumbling it with the likes of Gerald and Caleb, has he suddenly gone, wow, there's a lot wrong with the establishment and the way they do things. Wow, governments have been treating farmers abysmally for decades. One assumes if he had engaged with that side of the population much sooner, he would have voted Brexit as well. But I think he's an important voice. I mean, Clarkson's Farm is an absolute phenomenon, and it's wonderful. Not only is it a brilliantly engaging, entertaining, informative piece of television, haven't we all just suddenly realized what farming's about? This amazing industry that puts food on our shelves, that keep us alive. Until I watched that, you don't really understand how much hard work this is. How crazy the margins are, that people have to get up at 5 a.m. and do you know what? If it's going to rain next week, you better work 48 hours in a row, or your whole crop could be destroyed. We suddenly became alive to the toil and the tribulations that are faced in rural communities, and went, gosh, we've got respect for these people. I just wish more professions now had shows on things like Amazon Prime and Netflix. How about we look at what the long distance lorry driver has to go through? Doctors are constantly venerated, the police, all these sort of blue light industries. But how about we actually look at some of the other backbone of Britain? Totally. What the average man and woman gets up to keep this country running. Politicians have no idea.
Now, Alex, you remain very close to Nigel. He appeared on your Cider House Rules on your Substack, which is one of your new features. And people are going to ask the question, obviously, would you consider throwing your hat back in, becoming part of Reform UK, especially if there's a chance that he could actually be leading the government at the next election?
Dan, it's not would I will, it's about when. As well as I do, the sort of knots that people will tie us in is people who might be politically engaged and also try and have a job in broadcasting. And it's okay for Ed Balls to present and interview his own wife, but I have an Ofcom against me for having been elected for 6 months, 5 years ago, to a parliament we're not even in anymore. I had to sit out the general election because Ofcom said, well, she's a politician. Am I heck? I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. Do people know my party affiliations? Well, yes, I was in the Brexit party and connected to reform. But I've had to sort of sit out politics because I had to make a choice between earning a living and engaging in what I want to do. And this is how they try and get you. This is how they try and squeeze you. This is how they try to minimize you. This is how it's almost like lawfare, you know, this is how they try and silence the voices they want to be silenced. But they're not going to win. I will return to politics. I'll bloody well stand in the next election if I don't stand sooner. And you know what? Get past to number 10 myself at this stage. I'm only 40 years old, so watch this space.
Come on, that's what we need. That's what we need. And Alex, aren't you inspired watching what happened with Trump in the US? Because actually, all of the influence now has moved to the independent media. There aren't those same gatekeepers. And actually, the mainstream media, sure, they can try and maintain all of these traditions. But in fact, when you look at what happened with Musk and Rogan and Trump, that is a sign about what's going to happen over the next 5 years. The off-communists can try to regulate the internet as much as they like, but eventually they are going to lose. And I think what we're now doing in the independent media is going to be as much a part of the revolution as what happened in the States.
You know what? If you give people a reason to fight, they're going to fight. You know, it's a bit like Labi Sifa said, the higher you build my barriers, they've lost. It's gone. It's done. You know, we've reached peak woke. We've reached peak globalization. What's going to be amazing is to see how Trump actually deals with the supranational institutions. I've heard he's going to make an appointee as his representative to the UN, the sort of person who people are going to choke on the cornflakes and think, oh my... He's not going to, you know, he's not going to tolerate any of this stuff anymore. When you remember last time round, as American president, he didn't have control of the Senate and the Congress and the Supreme Court. He's got the hat trick now. Just you try and stop him. He's going to be able to be assertive in a way that people did not get to see last time. And he means business. You know, after everything that's happened to him, he is coming back swinging. And thank goodness, I just bought 3 MAGA hats online, one for me, one for my boyfriend, one for my mum. I want to wear it year round. I mean, this really is the moment now. This is the turning point. It's happened. It's happened, and good, can I just say, because it's caused so much damage while all of this has gone on, the open borders, the destruction of our heritage, the destruction of our values, the mocking of our native religion. Even if we're not filling up church pews, guess what? We still identify
as Christian.
You know, what they have done is going to be really hard to reverse, but I think finally we're stopping it in its tracks.
And hasn't it just been beautiful, Alex, watching the MSM meltdown as they realise that actually they've only been talking to themselves. They don't represent the wider public. And it's been fascinating to see the British media struggle to cope to, but we have to enjoy it. So what I want to do is take a look at some of the greatest moments from the past couple of days, and let's pass comment. I think perhaps, perhaps the most insane was Natasha Devon, who had a full-on breakdown on LBC over the weekend.
Weeping for the planet. It's devastating to think that our planet is going to have to endure even more abuse from humankind because the leader of the most powerful country in the Western world doesn't believe in man-made climate change. And of course, I'm scared for transgender people, for the LGBTQ community more broadly, for Black people, for other people of colour, for immigrants, for refugees. I'm sad for the American people who voted for Trump because they thought it would make their groceries and gas cheaper. Because according to Bloomberg forecasting, Trump's plans to deport millions of immigrants and slap tariffs on everything will plunge the United States into, at very least, a recession and at worst, a depression. So yes, I did cry this week.
Alex Phillips, how do you respond to Natasha Devon's tears?
Oh my God, Do you know, I think these people have spent so long gaslighting us, they've gaslit themselves, and they believe the words that come out of their mouths. They're utterly ludicrous. I mean, we've lived through one Trump presidency, and he's not, attacking people of colour or the LGBT community. I mean, what she basically, that was woke bingo, wasn't it? We had climate change, we had refugees, we had people of colour. Did we have women's rights over their own bodies? That was probably tossed in there. Oh, economic meltdown, just like happened as a result of Brexit. The cataclysm of finally a country, I don't know, just being a country and standing up for what its people want. Oh my goodness, you can't allow that to happen. That's against the New World Order. These people are laughable.
Yeah, and she's not speaking for you as a woman. She's not speaking for me as a gay man. Don't you dare lump me into your grouping. Thank you very much.
People are mad. And you know what? They've become parodies of themselves. I think the vast amount of people just look at them and go, what on earth is that? Have they had lobotomies? Like, what is wrong with these people? Are they mentally ill? They're the ones driving the mental health crisis with all of their nonsense. They need to get out into the real world. Guess what? Jill and John don't give a shit about climate change. Jill and John aren't particularly worried about whether someone's come from Afghanistan or Syria. And no one cares. No one's heart is bleeding about this stuff. What they care about is being able to feed their family, send them to a good school, not getting stabbed in the street. I mean, these people just live in a cloud cuckoo land, but their day has come. It's over. It's gone, folks. Give up.
It is. It is. And what I love, Alex, is seeing how they are now slightly trying to change the narrative as if we're stupid. And we saw this on Sly News over the weekend. I want to show you a couple of examples. So firstly, they got John Sopel from the news agents on to talk about Elon Musk. Watch this.
Can we just say about Elon Musk, because we're part of the press, Elon Musk has a platform called X. He's a brilliant space entrepreneur. He's a brilliant, clean battery Tesla entrepreneur, but he's not a politician. And he has taken X and he has used it as a weapon to bash actual truth. Sorry. He has, in his algorithms,
well, of course,
have gone hard right.
He would say that
we know that that's not true.
About freedom of expression.
Did you see what he did to your own government during the riots? Well, I mean, come on.
I think.
And actually, Alex Phillips, what Elon Musk did during the riots was, and I, by the way, say so-called riots because most of them weren't riots, but that's another conversation which we'll have later on in the show. But what he did that we received in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it, that they get to say the sky's going to fall down if you deign to leave the European Union, that Trump's going to, I don't know, lock children up in cages or whatever the mad thing, he's going to run Nazi trials. They get to say all of this absolute rubbish. They get to say nothing to see here and bury what Hunter Biden was up to, bury Joe Biden's corruption in getting his son all of these sort of, dodgy contracts. They get to bury all of this stuff. They get to pretend that Joe Biden can still function as a cognitive human being, and pretend. Then they get to just plant their person in without any open primaries. They're the ones who gaslight. They're the ones who lie.
Yes,
they're the ones who get cover-ups.
Well, given you mentioned Biden, I have to play you this because I was so furious, and you're so right to use the term gaslighting, because all of a sudden John Sopel, who ignored the Biden story when people like me were talking about it week after week, month after month. The US has a dementia-plagued president. All of a sudden, now he's decided it's a scandal, as if we aren't aware of the fact that he ignored it for all of those months. Have a look at this.
You all to that. Actually, the big question's lurking here. If this person is as rebarbative and horrid and ghastly as everybody seems to be saying, how is it possible that the Democrats lost? And that's the thing.
Okay, so maybe it was because not in spite of, but because of those things. I mean, I think that actually the prosecutions, it made him seem more of a victim. It made it seem like more of the political establishment was against him. There is the mother of all post-mortems taking place in Washington right now about why Kamala Harris lost, and a lot of finger pointing at Joe Biden. I believe it's going to become one of the great political scandals of our time about how the White House covered up the true physical and mental condition of Joe Biden for the 2 years before we saw him get on the debate stage at the CNN debate.
This is an interesting point, because I was very struck that not many people seem to be asking Kamala Harris, when did you know?
Well, the Wall Street Journal wrote a report saying there are really growing doubts about his mental agility and all the rest of it about 6-9 months ago, well before Joe Biden. And it was dumped on from a great height from some journalists and from White House staff. And it looks like it was real. I mean, I remember seeing Biden in 2021 at the G7 summit and thinking, he doesn't look great.
And this is the man, Alex, who on the day before the election was talking about the huge enthusiasm that was about to sweep America for Kamala Harris. I mean, surely we've just got to stop listening to idiots like John Sopel.
I mean, he says it. I remember seeing Joe Biden in 2021 thinking he doesn't look great. We had seen him repeatedly walk in the wrong direction, not finding the door, falling downstairs, stumbling over his words. I mean, when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, what did he call him? Rashid Sunak?
Yes, that's right.
Weird. I don't know what it was. I called him some mad name and said he was the first Muslim Prime Minister of the UK. That was Rishi Sunak. That was like, you know, the last Prime Minister. He's been demented, visibly so. You know, yeah, it's a bit like pointing to your mad great uncle in the pub who's just done a piss in the corner, but couldn't find the toilet, going, nothing, just here, he's fine. Oh, yeah, no. He could tightrope walk right now. We could all see that Joe Biden had lost it. Totally lost it. And the fact that him as a journalist, he used to be America's Washington, the BBC's Washington correspondent.
He covered the first Trump administration. And we know that he's as biased as they come. And actually, we know the BBC is, because Stephen Edgington from GB News has uncovered these brilliant leaks from the British Batching Corporation after Trump's win, actually comparing them to the Nazis. And, you know, a BBC source said quite rightly, this is more evidence of BBC staff's deranged view of Trump as a Nazi. And it's correct, isn't it, Alex? The BBC has not once during this campaign been able to accurately reflect the true picture of how Americans feel, because they were so desperate to talk up Kamala Harris as some sort of second coming.
What I think is more alarming, okay, is there's definitely a lot of corruption and cover-up in mainstream media, with the legacy media, let's say. I don't want to call them mainstream. I think that's kind of giving them a glorified platform they don't deserve. I don't think anyone cares about them anymore. But what I think is more disturbing than the cover-ups and the editorializing of the legacy media is the fact that they believe it. That mad that these people have managed to get jobs in senior positions, in communications positions, okay? So journalists are the gap that bridges information out there and what the public hears and understands, and that filter, that interpretation. And somehow these people have found themselves in a professional sphere where their job is supposed to be the curator and arbiter of information, and they are themselves utterly balmy.
Yeah.
They're like island crazy.
Totally. But Alex, that even more mad in the US. Even more mad. I have to show you someone on MSNBC who is taken seriously, right, as a political commentator, literally linking podcasts like Joe Rogan to fascism. This is one of the most bonkers minutes you will see, but it's so important to show you how mad the MSM are.
Particularly the media ecosystem it's not a good one, it's a negative one, it's a radicalization funnel. But what they have done in their online media ecosystem is build a radicalization engine, literally the way militant groups do around the world, that takes people from relatively low-level annoyances with the world. Why are eggs so expensive? Why is my kid learning this new thing in American history in school that I didn't learn? And then moves them through YouTube videos, through podcasts, moves them from that annoyance all the way slowly to a full-blown fascist politics. It's an elaborate multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, and there is nothing like it on the pro-democracy side. We don't have when a man is just lost and lonely and not yet radicalized, we don't have the equivalent of Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson to move that man in a feminist direction. By the way, we should educate men that it's actually really great to live with a strong woman who makes money. It's actually easier. Life is easier.
But I think
I mean, Alex, look at how they think. So commentators like us, are apparently creating little Nazis.
Well, we're Goebbels, baby. At this point, we're Goebbels. But what is it as well about these people? There is something, you see them, you can tell. When you look at them and when you hear their voice, there's something going on at a sort of biochemical level. These weird low testosterone men, these sort of strange, shrill women. Honestly, you can actually see it in their eyes, something about the way they look and compose themselves, that they don't look well, that something fundamentally in their biology has gone wonky. And I want to know what it is. What are they eating? What are they drinking? How do they get to that stage? I mean, this guy, like I said, he spent so long in the process of gaslighting. I tell you what goes on here, right? Worse in America than it is in Britain. If you work on a farm, or, you know, if you pull pints in the pub or something like that, or drive a lorry, then you get to say and think what you want. And you live in a society where you have reality around you. Okay. You see poverty, you see deprivation, you see high inward migration. You can't pay your bills. You know, reality is very much on your back. If you're somebody who works in a grey collar industry, and worse still, if it's in the creative industries, then you know, in order to get to the next stage of your career, you've got to go along with this shit. You've got to say, yeah, you know, I've got gay friends, or then that escalates to all trans rights, and then that's I love all refugees. And you know, you've got to say those things. If you, even as a teacher, if you said I voted Brexit, that's it, ostracized in the staff room. You're not going to be head of department. You're not going to be head of year. You're never going to be deputy head, let alone headmaster. So in order to get to the next stage process, you've got to go along with it. And I think these people have done it because they've had to do it to get to where they get to. They've done it so much that they believe it. They're now totally indoctrinated.
Yeah, they are. And what's interesting to me, Alex, is can this be a moment where things change forever? And you know, Steve Bannon, who I have great respect for, is on certainly the more, shall we say, revolutionary side of the Trump orbit, but he is still incredibly influential in that world. And I want to show you the proposal that he is putting forward to Donald about how the mainstream media should be treated as soon as Trump takes office in early January. Watch this.
Put the media over there. Get them out of the West Wing. They don't deserve to be. Put them out of the West Wing. In first three rows, so MSM, NBC, CBS, ABC, suck on this, because this, I hope, is the plan that gets implemented. The first three rows are all the podcasts and the bros and all that. The first three rows of that, the new media, alternative media, the streaming services. You guys are like in the cheap seats. You're in the fifth and sixth row because you know what? You deserve to be in the cheap seats. All you do is attack him and rip him apart. You think we're now going to honor you? No, the Helen Thomases of the world, the tremendous reporter, I think she was UPI or AP, who always got the first question. Boom. That should be new media.
Alex, I mean, clearly I have a vested interest, but music to my ears. He's right, isn't he? Wouldn't it be great if that's how Trump treated the media? Because that's how this can go from being a moment in time to a permanent revolution, a permanent destruction of these disgusting MSM forces that for so long have tried to do down ordinary people.
So with all due respect to Steve Bannon, who I think is a brilliant mind, I think the idea of fully destructing professional journalism is one of those be careful what you wish for, because as a, you know, you're a professional journalist, I'm a professional journalist, and we actually know there are things you have to do. You've got to understand libel, you've got to understand balance, you've got to have right of reply. There's, you know, it's a bit like saying, you know, I've watched Grey's Anatomy and now I'm going to be a heart surgeon. There is a professionalism to journalism, there is an artistry. The fact that we've got the wrong people doing it and they've betrayed it, they've bastardized it, they've completely ruined the profession and discredited it, it's vile. It burns, it hurts, you know, to watch that happen. I think that, you know, organic forces are going to make these companies turn around, because they're not going to have the footfall. They're not going to have the eyes on. Commercially, they're going to have to switch up. Let the market forces do that, okay? I think if, you know, Trump listens to Bannon and he suddenly goes, right, I'm banning legacy media, or, you know, putting them, relegating to the backseat, and I'm just going to have a load of podcasters and all the rest instead, citizen journalists, whilst I think they should be in the room, and invited to do that. And I think it's so important because we're holding the feet to the fire of the so-called professional journalists. I think it would play too much into the narrative of some sort of fascistic narrative control. So I would say, you know, cool it, Steve. I think you make a very good point. I'm with you in terms of your sentiment, but actually let the market do its work, because at the end of the day, people are tuning out. And if they want to survive, look, I mean, the industry, the linear output industry is dying.
Yes.
It's in a downward spiral. It's in a death spiral. It's why people like you and I do this now. You know, they are losing
and the
money.
biggest numbers on YouTube on election night were for PBD, for his coverage with Candace Owens of the election result, for Megyn Kelly and her coverage of the election result, for the Daily Wire and their coverage. They were not for the legacy media operations like CBS, NBC. So I think you're right. The market is making the decision. And actually, let me just show you Alex Phillips' beautiful, brand new Substack. That's what she said. Now, if you look there, there is an exclusive interview with Tommy Robinson that took place just before he entered prison. It was a very emotional interview. I'm going to ask Alex about it, and we'll watch some of it in just 1 minute, so don't go anywhere. But first, I love the holidays. It's my favourite time of year in so many ways, but I find it can be very demanding, going to all of the events, dinners, looking for gifts, planning the day itself. Every year, I'm not going to lie, I tend to burn out quicker than the last. And let's be honest, it's probably because I'm getting older. I'm in my 40s now. But this year, I don't plan to burn out at all. Getting older is inevitable, but feeling older isn't. As we get older, our body's ability to create energy declines, but recent scientific discoveries have found we can actually increase our energy levels in our cells by taking something called NMN. NMN has been shown to increase energy and endurance, activate our body's ability to burn fat, enhance mental function and health, improve blood pressure, regulate blood sugar levels, and support many other health markers. Finding high-quality pure NMN is hard, so I use Verso. They conduct third-party testing for each batch produced to guarantee you get what you paid for. It contains the highest quality NMN and other research-backed ingredients that have been shown to increase energy levels and slow down aging. After taking Celbene for some time, I feel like a younger version of myself. I've noticed more energy, enhanced endurance, improved cognition, fat loss, better sleep. And if I do get a cold, I recover faster, which is very good at the moment given everything going around. So click the link in the description on YouTube and Rumble, or head on over to buy.ver.so. If you use the coupon code Outspoken at checkout, you will save 15% on your first order. So let me just repeat the address: www.buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code Outspoken. But now back to the show. And a teenager who was jailed over the so-called riots, 14 months this young lad was given. Well, he has had his conviction entirely overturned. Now, I think this is absolutely the right decision. It is disgusting that Dylan Willis, an 18-year-old who was responsible for absolutely no violence, was given 14 months detention by Teesside Crown Court. It was clearly excessive. And 3 senior judges made clear that this young lad's complex developmental and mental health background had also not been taken into account. But it does make you think, doesn't it, how many other political prisoners do we have in our system at the moment? How many people were made an example of specifically because of their political positions over the Southport massacre? And no one is more of an example of that than Tommy Robinson, who remains behind bars in HMP Woodhull. Well, Alex Phillips interviewed Tommy for her brilliant new Substack. That's what she said just before he went to jail. And it was an absolutely fascinating exchange. Watch this.
No one wants to sit down with us. No one, still now. No one wants to sit down and talk to us. So if no one wants to sit down and talk to us, our place was on the street.
When people do want to raise the topics of multiculturalism, two tiers, all the rest of it, it's easier for people to say to you, well, you know, it's far-right thugs.
Muslims are people. If you hate Muslims, it's a problem. 100,000 people are on the street. 800,000 people are watching live. Show me any political party or any politician that can do that. They can't. What people like to do is to make themselves feel comfortable about talking about this issue, they bash me first.
Now, Alex, this interview, I watched it all. It was absolutely intriguing. Tommy was very emotional. I also thought it was a really brave move for you because, of course, you still do a lot of work in the mainstream media. Up until now, there has been this sort of feeling that if you even talk about Tommy Robinson, then somehow you're moving to the fringes, I guess. So talk to me about why you decided to interview Tommy and what you think about the fact that he is now behind bars for 18 months.
Right. So first of all, I mean, there was almost a sort of a rush on getting to Shamima Begum in a refugee camp to interview her. She was on the cover of the Times magazine or something, the Times Sunday, I don't know which one.
Big BBC documentary, The Full Works.
God, you know, there was some sort of like fetishization of Shamima Begum at one point. The other day I was watching the television. It was the IRA sitting down in an IRA guy, the one who put the bomb under Maggie Thatcher's bathtub, sitting down in a cozy interview because that's okay. Actual terrorists. You had, for instance, let's talk about Majid Nawaz, right? He used to be Al-Qaeda or something, and then suddenly went, I've seen the light and I hate being a terrorist, and was given a radio show. So actually everybody else can be exonerated, everybody else can have a Damascene conversion and be purified and bask in the light of a revelation that they did things wrong in the past, unless you're working class. Unless you're white and working class, there is no salvation for you. You're always wrong, you're always evil. Now, Tommy Robinson is a phenomenon, okay? There was Tommy Robinson back in the day, which I must admit, like everybody else, I sort of, drank the Kool-Aid and thought this man was a thug and a monster. And then something happened, and I suddenly realized how many ordinary folk were now going to his rallies. He's moved into the arena of making, say, documentaries and putting these long-form pieces out, which are actually extremely well produced and crafted. And I started to realize, hold on, the people now who are following Tommy Robinson aren't wearing ballies and, swigging lagers and out for a fight. They're ordinary folk. And actually, he's commanding a huge amount of interest and intrigue. What is going on? And guess what? I'm a journalist, which means I want to speak to that person. So I decided I was going to speak to that person, and I didn't know what to expect. He had actually contacted me on Twitter because I've got open DMs and said, I've watched some of the things you said and I think you're really great, keep it up. And I was like, I remember when I first saw that message in my inbox, and I was like, oh my God, Tommy Robinson's messaged me. But part of me was thrilled. Part of me was like, a sort of rush of excitement, because this is a big character who said, I know who you are and I like what you're doing. And I felt sort of like, oh my God, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Have I overstepped the mark? Have I gone too far? And I replied to him, sort of tentatively sat there, fingers hovered over the keyboard, and just went, thanks. It would be really good to speak to you one day. And so this back and forth happened. And what I found is he was very willing and very trusting to let me do what I did. And I said to him, look, Tommy, I'm not going to give you a hagiography. I can't. I'll explode if I do that. My career's over. And I said, it's not going to be a gotcha interview either. What I want to do is ask you difficult questions, but not in a way that I'm trying to trip you up. I just want to ask you things that I think other people would want to ask you if they were in my position. And he said, yeah, come on, let's do this. And so I did. We sat there and it was a really long interview. I had to crop it down to make the 1 hour. And do you know what I found? I found a man who, when he said to me, this is where I grew up, and this is what I saw, it was harrowing. It was really quite disturbing to find out that his cousin had been groomed to talk about these terrorist-connected gangs who were dealing drugs on his estate. And then talking about how the local council treated these people who ended up being outed as terrorist organizations. and that they spat on soldiers. And the local lad said, yeah, as a football hooligan, yeah, as rough and tumble, dog eat dog world. That's what we did in gangs and fighting. But he said, us and the lads decided we didn't want this anymore. No spitting on soldiers, no grooming our cousins, no dealing drugs on our streets and smashing up windows. And so they, first of all, did a petition. How very unruly, how very hooligan. Did a petition. And of course, it was ignored. And so they then decided to go out and march. And he said, watch the early videos. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I went back onto YouTube and I watched the early videos of, it wasn't called the EDL then, it was People's Front of Luton or something. And I watched those early videos, and yeah, they were like rough and tumble lads. Some had ballies on, but they were carrying signs saying we hate extremism. But they were also carrying signs saying no to racism. And that's just, it was amazing. We're talking about stuff from the late 90s, right? And then onwards in sort of like 2009. And I'm looking at it thinking, no, he's right. In these videos, there's one video of a load of guys in like sort of paramilitary getup, but they're burning the swastika, actually setting fire to the Nazi flag. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. That's not what I was told. Anyway, as I carried on speaking to him, I suddenly realized it's very simple. He's got fuck all to lose. His life already been destroyed. He decided to take a stand against what was going on in his own town because he was like, this is unconscionable now. I can't put up with this. And as a result, bam, he can't have a job anymore. He can't go about and live his life as normal. The Muslims probably all want to kill him, the extremist Muslims.
Certainly they do in jail. Yeah, and you were right. This is something that happens post-cancellation, whether it's Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, or me. You have nothing to lose. So there is an honesty. But he was so emotional with you too, Alex. I just want to take a quick look at this and then you can explain what was happening off the back.
I'm upset thinking about it, man. Oh, mate. Her whole life has changed.
So what was he so emotional about, Alex?
It makes me emotional watching it back. So this is I've got to be careful what I say because this is what put him in prison. But yes. He made a film all about essentially what had gone on with a guy who had been at a school. He was an asylum seeker child. And there are huge reports going on that this guy had been treated really badly. He was being waterboarded and bullied. And his work in speaking to the head teacher, speaking to other pupils, revealed that this wasn't really what the reality of the situation was. So then the powers that be gang up against him, drag him into court. And he had to defend himself, get children to testify for him. Other kids at that school to testify on his behalf and say Tommy Robinson was telling the truth in his documentary. He asked the judge to protect the identities of those children, saying they're children. I don't want to have to get kids to testify for me, but because this is all taking place in a school setting. Anyway, the judge did not anonymize the names of the children. And some of these children, according to Tommy and their families, have received rape threats, death threats. And he's talking about one particular girl who was a straight A student, the only kid in her school to get straight A's. I think he sort of suggested that she might have neurodiversity, but a really good girl who just said, I got to do this because it's right. I got to stand up for you because, I think she might have been a victim of bullying and so on and so forth. So she went to testify in court. As a result, her and her family became targets in the most horrifying way. And I said to him, and that's what he was crying about, saying her life's now ruined. And I said to him, is that a really big burden for you to carry? This is what people don't understand. There are so many people swept under the carpet and forgotten about. He's the one who is held up as the person who needs to be crucified. He's the one who has to be chucked into prison. He's the one who has to be demonized, and it's worked effectively, okay? But the majority of people are beginning to question that now.
Well, yes, and Alex, I just wanted to bring it right back full circle before we go to the after show. to ask you where you stand politically now on Tommy Robinson, because you know there is a debate that is going on behind the scenes in Reform UK. Howard Cox was on this show making it clear that he was very opposed to Richard Tice having described Tommy Robinson's supporters as that lot, and he said that Nigel Farage had been in touch with him and said that Richard had gone too far. So where do you stand? Do you understand why Reform UK are so nervous about any sort of association with Tommy Robinson supporters? Or actually, do you think they need to follow the Trump playbook and not worry so much about the fact that the mainstream media are always going to, I guess, use the usual smears?
Right. Do you know, Dan, it's about numbers and it's about projecting your growth in the future. Reform UK polled, what, sort of 13, 14, 15%, something like that. If they want to actually make a difference in politics, that's got to be up in the 20s and 30s. That means bringing cohorts of different voters together. And there's still a lot of people who will just go with what they think the truth is, or what they've been told, what they've been spoon-fed for a long time. You know as well as I do, Dan, that if Nigel turned around and said, do you know what, I think Tommy Robinson's been badly mistreated, he doesn't get to say anything else then. Every interview will be about that. It doesn't matter what he's talking about on health or education or whatever sanity he might be speaking in any other department. That's it, it's gone. It's a clip. It's over, because that's the game that they play. And I think Nigel's sitting there going, do you know what? If we're going to really look after this country, we've got to be able to get a proper foothold. And that means having to be somewhat tactical. And that means realizing that actually, you know, we're out here doing this thing. There's still a whole load of voters who are watching the BBC News at 6 or reading, you know, whatever newspaper it may be, and getting their news from those sources. And even if it's wrong that it would happen that way, they would potentially be alienated if the legacy media got their way in spinning what they want to spin. And Nigel can't fall into that trap. But I do think a time will come that actually, you know, that people will have to turn around and say, you've got to.
Well, the Overton window is shifting a little bit. I had Robert Jenrick on. He wouldn't speak about Tommy Robinson specifically, but he would absolutely speak about Tommy Robinson's supporters and say that he understood why they were on that march. And I thought, wow, member of the Conservative Party who's running for the leader, talking that way.
You know, I've been ducking the question and talking about him as a phenomenon and the people who supported him. So let me actually address the question, shall I, about what do I think of him? I think he's wonderful. I don't know, something really moved me when I interviewed him. Maybe he's some sort of huge fraud who's really good at pulling the wool over my eyes.
No, because it's so interesting, Alex. Look at America. Look at these people in the independent media who I have so much respect for. Jordan Peterson, Ezra Levant, you know, Ann Coulter. All of these people, Steve Bannon, all of these people talk about Tommy Robinson in the way that you talk about Tommy Robinson. The problem is we have worked in the mainstream media for such a long time where you know that if you even utter the word Tommy Robinson, you're probably going to be taken off air. So, of course, that's why you feel now like, oh, have I said something wrong? But look, Alex Phillips, well, number one, let me just show where people can get your incredible Substack, because it is so worth following. That's what she said. There's the most recent post, Amsterdam, a dry run for terror attacks, but you can also get the Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage interviews exclusively on there. I'm such a big fan of Substack, and that's where I'm moving to the after show. So I'm delighted that Alex is on there too. It's a great free speech platform. But please don't go anywhere, Alex, because in just a moment we are going to move to the Uncancelled after show to discuss whether the new Boots commercial, Christmas commercial, is actually an example of anti-white racism. I think it is, personally. And also Narendra Kaur's shock attack on Catherine, the Princess of Wales. So all you have to do is head to www.outspoken.live. It is our membership section where you get half an hour of extra content every single weekday. Remember, back tomorrow, 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Please make sure you subscribe, spread the word. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you. We'll see you on the after show with more from the brilliant Alex Phillips in just one.